This is the Tournament Night CMF that came out way back in 2020. It's my all-time favorite minifigure, but unfortunately, these guys are stupidly expensive on the aftermarket. Thankfully, I've got a pretty large army of them, so today we're going to be building them a village, and we're also going to be upgrading a tower that I made for them a few months ago. Not only that, but we'll also be taking a look at all of the lore and characters that make up this Mercenary kingdom. Now, before we get started building the village, I'd like to take a little look at some of the minifigures that are going to go in it. Here we have two city watchmen that patrol the village for any bandits or orc nomads looking to steal from them. You see, these mercenaries originally came from the far north, but they were pushed out by the Black Falcons. So they made their way south, marching across the continent and getting hired to fight in war after war, until they had enough coin to sail south into the mean and harsh desert that the orcs call home. After landing in the southern continent, it would take them years to find a proper place to settle down in. But eventually, their leader, who we'll meet soon enough, found a beautiful and lush oasis for them to build their village in. So back to current day, we also have a couple of villagers here that we're about to build the farmhouse for. The woman has a bucket for collecting any berries and fruit, and the man here has a hammer because he's the master swordsmith of the village and produces all of the swords that the soldiers may need in battle. We can see him here working on reforging the captain's greatsword. It was split in two after a particularly deadly fight with none other than Basil the Bat Lord. It's been many, many years since this sword has last seen war, and the captain hopes to reunite with it in the field of battle soon enough. So now that we've taken a little look at the folks living in the house, let's actually build the thing. To begin, we're going to start with a simple technique that I want to show you. This combination of parts makes for a super convincing Tudor or half-timber style of wall. All you have to do is alternate brown and white pieces on this snot brick, and you have the basis for all of the walls that we're making today. I'm also using a couple of masonry bricks here and there to show the stonework pattern that's under the white paint. That little bit of extra texture makes a big difference in the final product. So to start the farmhouse, all we're going to do is lay down a green base plate for the grass, and then add the wooden brown foundation to it. Once we have that all in place, we can start by adding in our half-timber walls. The front wall here is going to be decorated with a windowsill with a couple of flowers on it. If you can't tell, I've just ripped this design straight from the medieval town square because I think it works quite well in that set. We're also going to add in a front door here with a small printed lock piece on it. You'll notice that this is all placed on top of some of these 1x4 jumper plates that let these snot bricks fit onto the foundation. And now that we have the front wall done, we can just repeat this same design around each wall of the farmhouse. The left side will get another windowsill with flowers, while the other two walls are going to be left blank, only to be decorated with a couple of windows here and there. The back side of this building's not going to be visible, so I really don't need to waste many parts on it. Okay, so now that the four walls are done, we can start adding in some furniture to the interior. I'll add in a bed that I made with a simple checkered pattern, and then we can add in a small kitchen section for the couple to cook at. Then right next to that, we'll add a desk with a book and quill, and a little storage section for some carrots, and finally some farming tools across from the desk. This interior space leaves us a decent amount of room for the two figures to move around in, but it's still fairly detailed. Now we can start working on the roof. I've made these two pieces that are pretty similar to the ones found in the Viking village. I find this combination of slopes makes it super easy to add a roof to it, so that's what I went with today. As for the roof itself, I decided that I wanted to have a dark tan and brown trimmed roof. I think that this color scheme works pretty well for the farmhouse, and I imagine that the dark tan represents a thatched roof design of some kind. I basically took the roof from the medieval town square's farmhouse, and I've slightly changed the design to one that I find a lot more appealing. These claw pieces in dark tan are honestly great for any thatched roof, and I think using them sparingly actually worked quite well in this build. All you have to do to make a roof like this one is use a couple of snot bricks and attach them at a 90-degree angle. It's really that simple. So now all we've got to do is drop it into place and gravity does the rest. It slots in really nicely and it really doesn't move around at all. So now that the first house is done, I'm sure you've noticed that I've placed a lot of orangey yellow leaves around it. And that's because our next build is going to be an autumn colored tree set in the center of the village. We'll again be starting with a green base plate that we can add some flowers to and a couple of fallen leaves. To go along with that, we'll also place some roots coming out of the small green hill and the base for our tree. I've wrapped a whip piece around the trunk to look like another wild root is coming out of the ground. I think the effect works quite nice here. The bulk of this tree is in this assembly right here. It uses a lot of curved brown pieces and also a couple of regular old brown bars. Attached to that, we've got our bright light orange leaves that are placed at different angles to get a more natural look. Finally, all we have to do is attach the trunk to the rest of the tree. I love how this little tree section ended up looking, and we're also going to throw in a couple more villagers to this part of the build. This lady is going to be taking a rest under the shade of the tree, while this missionary stands there scolding her for her slothful ways. I love how this looks even more now with the minifigures in it, but now let's get started building the Carpenters Workshop. Again, we're starting the build with a green base plate and a brown foundation. The Carpenter's Workshop is going to be a fair bit smaller than the Farmhouse, but we still should have enough room for a detailed interior. For the walls, we're using the same technique as before, but this time with tan instead of white. Only one wall is going to have the windowsill, as the others will be facing away from us. Now, once all 4 walls are in place, again, we're going to make the interior. Like I said, this is a Carpenter's Workshop, so I've given him a nice, heavy stone desk for him to work on all his projects. On this desk, we're going to place a small shelf in the back with a couple of trinkets and a bag of supplies. Above the desk on the right side, I've also placed a couple of schematics for him to follow, and on the opposite wall, we have a couple of loots that he's made. Finally, we're also going to throw in a barrel with some tools and a chair to go behind the desk. This is a really compact looking interior, but I'm pretty happy with the way it ended up looking. And now that that's done, we can get started working on the roof. I wanted the same style of roof as the Farmhouse, but I wanted it to be a different color scheme and just look a little bit different. So I've taken a bunch of these CMF plates and I've laid them out flat with a couple of autumn leaves. At first I wanted to use the new printed D&D ones, but I honestly prefer how the plain black ones look here, at least in this mock. And with that, we can just plop it down onto the building and it's done. But of course we are going to need a carpenter to go with the workshop, so I've made this guy. He's a pretty simple looking peasant figure, but I love how this face print and hair combo ended up looking. Oh, and I've also given him a lantern so that he can work in the dark. Okay, so now that the village buildings are done, we can now make a few changes to my Raven Tower and populate it with a couple of mercenaries. But before we do that, I'd like to quickly take a look at a couple of characters that I haven't shown you yet. I've made these 2 villagers that use some really nice blue peasant parts, and I've placed them next to a well. The original well design can be found in my old medieval village video from last year, but I got the inspiration for this well in a great mock video by Q-Brick that I'll link below. Anyways, next up we have a traveling orc merchant that's come into the village oasis to sell some produce. He set himself up with a little market stall just outside the outskirts of the village, and he hopes to entice some of them with his rare vegetables and baked goodies. I personally love how this orc merchant ended up looking. His dark green turban is just a perfect match for my orcs. Anyways, we can now finally take a look at the tower and my Raven mercenaries now. I originally built this tower just a couple of months ago, but it didn't have a base plate of any kind, which I know a lot of people didn't like. So to fit with the theme of this build, I've given it a green base plate, and I've also scattered some of those pretty orange leaves all around the tower. I'm genuinely really surprised how much more finished this build looks now with the base plate and extra leaves. I really didn't change much, but it just feels so much more complete now. Honestly, this is still my favorite thing that I've ever built even to this day, and I really want to make another Raven castle soon. Speaking of which, let's now take a look at those ravens that'll populate the village. Here we have the captain of the Raven Warband. After facing a horrible defeat while serving under the Crown Knights, the Raven leader decided to bide his time to eventually liberate some of his men that were captured during the war. While the Raven mercenaries rot away in Basil's prison, the captain is preparing for war. He's instructed his master swordsmith to reforge his greatsword, and has also been parleying with a band of orc warriors. He hopes with the added strength of the orcs, he and his army can save the prisoners and get some much needed revenge for his former liege. And so here we have the rest of the ravens that I've decided to include in this mock. We've got the leader, a crossbowman to sit atop the tower, and a couple of heavy knights to go with the city watchman from earlier. I didn't want to pack in too many soldiers into this build, so I think this is just about the right amount. This whole scene was so much fun to build, and it's got me very eager to make a Fright Knight versus Raven battle mock. I've got a lot of ideas for it in my head right now, so stay on the lookout for that sometime soon. Again, I wanted to make a fun autumn mock, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. Please let me know if you like the build, and if you've got any suggestions for it, or for future mocks, please feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe? I've got a lot more mock videos coming very soon. And as always, thank you so much for watching.